In the cold silence of space, far beyond the mapped borders of the Galactic Union, a human research station known as Eos Outpost floated quietly near the edge of the Trion Nebula. Surrounded by stars that flickered like ancient warnings, the outpost had one job: observe deep space phenomena and report any unusual activity. Staffed with only 20 scientists, engineers, and security officers, Eos was not a military base, nor a threat to anyone. It was a peaceful station meant for knowledge and exploration. For years, it operated without issue, sending routine data back to Earth and occasionally transmitting friendly messages to passing ships. Then, one day, without warning, Eos stopped sending signals. At first, Earth Command believed it to be a technical glitch, perhaps a malfunction in the outpost communication array or a solar flare disrupting signals. A few technicians were assigned to monitor the situation, expecting the station to resume transmission within a few hours. But hours turned into days, and days into weeks. Still, no word. Not even a distress call. That's when the unease began to spread through Earth's Defense Command. A full team of analysts reviewed satellite data, long-range scans, and encrypted black box backups. Nothing made sense. There were no signs of an explosion or an internal failure. It was as if the entire station had vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone. Earth Command initiated a silent investigation. No public announcements. No press conferences. Only classified orders. They sent 3 stealth drones to the Eos coordinates, armed not with weapons, but with sensors and recording equipment. The drones took 7 days to reach the location. What they found was chilling. There was no trace of the outpost in orbit. No floating debris. No broken satellites. The station itself had been moved, or more accurately, something had taken it. One of the drones detected a slight energy trail, something faint and unfamiliar, heading into the denser regions of the Trion Nebula. The fleet followed the signal and found what remained of Eos. The station was there, hidden inside a gas cloud, completely deactivated. The outer hull was intact, but covered in strange burn-mark scars that didn't match any known weapons. Portions of the metal plating were melted in circular patterns, as if something had bored into it. The drones scanned the interior and found no life signs. The crew was missing. Not dead missing. No blood, no bodies, no signs of a struggle. As if they had simply disappeared. The only clue was inside the command center. One wall, once clean and silver, now had something burned into it. A massive alien word, carved with energy so hot it warped the walls. The translation team worked non-stop. It took them 2 days to decode the symbols. When the message finally translated, it shook Earth's highest command to its core. One word. One threat. Submission. Earth Command held an emergency meeting. The top military generals, scientific advisors, and political leaders gathered in a hidden room beneath the Arctic Defense Facility. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They just listened to the data, the drone footage, and the eerie silence left behind by 20 missing human lives. The Terran president, a former soldier herself, stood at the head of the table and gave a single order: begin silent protocol. Across the world, human fleets were quietly recalled from diplomatic missions. Trade routes were rerouted. Defense satellites were reactivated. Civilian news stations were fed peaceful updates, while military factories went into overdrive. Earth did not panic. Earth prepared. In the shadows of its cities, humans whispered rumors about Eos, unsure of what had happened but sensing something dark was coming. Scientists worked day and night to understand the weapon used on the station, trying to identify the energy signatures and the species responsible. All they had were fragments, but the pattern of destruction was unlike anything recorded before. It wasn't just a raid. It was a message. A declaration. Someone had tested humanity's limits. Someone had taken their people and left behind a challenge. The Galactic Union was informed, but only partially. Earth shared that Eos had experienced a communications failure and was under investigation. The truth, however, was kept secret. Humans didn't trust easily anymore. Not after watching other species turn their backs in past conflicts. Not after years of being underestimated and mocked for their emotions and idealism. This time, they would act without permission. One general, an older man with a mechanical arm and a reputation for surviving impossible battles, stood before the council and said, "We offered peace for 100 years. We gave them our knowledge, our trade, and our help. This was their answer. Now we give them our silence, and then we give them our wrath." Humanity had never been the most advanced species in the galaxy. They weren't the strongest or the fastest, but they were the most determined. When others stopped at warning signs, humans pushed forward. When others feared death, humans defied it. And when others surrendered, humans resisted. In the weeks following the discovery of Eos, every major Earth fleet went dark. Ships were fitted with new armor, faster drives, and weapons still in testing. Soldiers were recalled from leave. Old war veterans were brought in to advise the young. A silence fell across the Earth's communication systems, not because they were afraid, but because they were focused, preparing for something greater than defense. They didn't know who the enemy was yet, but when they found out, the response would not be diplomatic. The world that once reached for the stars with open hands had been answered with fire, and now they would return it tenfold. Far away, in a hidden part of the galaxy, an alien council reviewed footage from a secret observer ship that had watched the Eos incident unfold. They debated among themselves, discussing how easy it had been to take the humans, how simple it was to test their will. Some warned that they had gone too far. Others laughed. One leader said, "They are still young, still fragile. They won't fight. They'll accept their place." But across the stars, the humans were already moving. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like a storm you don't hear until it's too late. And in the darkness of space, among the shattered remains of the outpost, a single drone remained transmitting one final message back to Earth, repeating the same line over and over again. They took Eos. No survivors. No mercy. We are not alone. In the deepest corner of the galaxy, far beyond any human probe or patrol, a hidden system pulsed with life. Orbiting a dying blue star was the secret world of Valaris, home to the High Council of the Arcari Dominion, one of the oldest and most mysterious civilizations in the known universe. They were ancient, proud, and feared by many for their knowledge of forbidden technology and their mastery of psychological warfare. Their world was not listed on any star map. Only those with permission from the council could find it. It was inside this cold marble chamber, built inside a mountain that pierced the clouds, that 12 alien figures gathered around a long obsidian table. They called themselves the Voices of Order, but they were the ones who had sent the signal to destroy the human outpost. Tall, silent, and wrapped in ceremonial robes stitched with glowing threads, the council members did not breathe air or speak aloud. Their thoughts were linked in a mental web, sharp as blades and colder than steel. The silence inside the chamber was not peaceful. It was judgmental, arrogant, and calculated. One of the younger members, with skin like polished stone and eyes that shimmered like glass, presented the latest intelligence report. A hologram rose in the air, showing the damaged Eos outpost drifting silently through the nebula. Another projection showed human drones arriving and recording the destruction. And then came the final image, a translation of the single alien word etched into the wall of the outpost: submission. The moment the word appeared, several of the council members emitted a strange sound, something between a hiss and a laugh, not out of joy, but out of mockery. To them, humans were an experiment, a curious species that rose too fast and believed too deeply in themselves. Their emotions, their bravery, their strange obsession with sacrifice, these things confused the Arcari. The council had been watching them for decades, sometimes interfering in small ways to see how they responded to threats. Eos had been their latest test, a simple show of force to see if humanity would bow, retreat, or beg for mercy. One elder, known as Seer Kral, whose mind had outlived 5 centuries of galactic history, leaned forward and broadcast his thought across the room. They are primitive. They still believe in honor, still cling to hope. It is time they learned fear. A few nodded in agreement, but one voice, sharper and younger, broke the pattern. It was the Mind Blade, a council member known for his ruthless strategies and recent victories over 3 frontier worlds. They will not run, he said. They will retaliate. They are not like the others. They are stubborn, unpredictable. If we provoke them too far, they may become more dangerous than we expected. The room grew colder, their psychic web tightening in response to his doubt. But the elder seer Kral dismissed the warning with ease. They are children. Loud, reckless children. Let them try. They will find only silence where they shout, and darkness where they seek light. While they laughed, far from Vilaris, human fleets were already being mobilized. The Arkari thought they still had the upper hand, believing their secrecy and ancient technologies made them untouchable. They didn't know humans had begun decoding their energy signals. They didn't realize that a secret Earth-based AI had already traced the strange quantum disturbance left behind by the attackers. The Council believed they were shadows, but the humans had started seeing through the dark. Still, the Arkari were not fools. They knew war would eventually come, so they began preparing their homeworld's defenses. Dozens of defense towers, cloaked in storm clouds, powered up. Space mines reactivated along hidden lanes, and hundreds of sleeper drones launched into nearby systems disguised as debris. They even prepared a psychological weapon, the Silence virus, a signal-based attack that could disrupt neural communication in most species. They assumed it would work on humans. But as they watched the drones near the wreckage of Eos, and as they studied the human response, or rather the lack of open response, they became confused. Why had Earth not issued a threat? Why had no public outrage followed? Why did the humans not accuse anyone or demand answers? This silence disturbed the Mind Blade most of all. He understood war better than the others. He knew when an enemy was bluffing, and he knew when an enemy was watching. He requested that a special observer vessel be sent closer to the Sol system. It was a stealth-class scout, made of living metal, able to mimic radiation and cloak its engine trails. It had no weapons, only sensors. When it reached the edge of the human system, it found nothing, no chatter, no exposed fleets, no trade traffic. Just empty silence and distant satellites. But as it drifted closer to Mars' orbit, it was detected by something it couldn't identify. Not a ship. Not a drone. A shadow moved through the space behind it. Before it could even send a signal back to Vilaris, the observer vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone like dust scattered by the wind. Back on Vilaris, the Council waited for its return. Hours passed. Then days. The Mind Blade's concern deepened. We may have misjudged their quiet, he warned again. But Seer Kral, blinded by arrogance, silenced him. If they are hiding, it is because they are afraid. If they strike, we will crush them. The others nodded, satisfied with their own logic. They had dealt with rebellions before. They had crushed stronger civilizations in the past. They believed this would be no different. But far from their cold mountain, deep inside a dark chamber on Earth, the Terran president stood before a war room filled with military leaders and strategists. On a large screen behind her, a red mark blinked where the observer vessel had entered the system and where it had disappeared. They're watching us, she said calmly. Let them. Because now we know exactly where to strike. And in that moment, the wrath of humanity, quiet, patient, and burning like a hidden flame, was ready to be unleashed. I in the cold silence of deep space, where stars blinked like old memories and blackness stretched forever, a human fleet moved like a silent storm. No signals, no radio chatter, no warnings. The warships glided through the void, their dark hulls absorbing light, their engines tuned to emit almost nothing. These ships were not ordinary. They were Terran-class vengeance vessels, designed not just to fight, but to erase. Behind the polished metal, there were humans whose eyes burned with silent fury. The destruction of Eo's outpost had not made them fearful. It had awakened something older and darker inside them, a unity that only came when their survival was challenged. On Earth, nothing had been shown to the public. No threats were posted. No enemies were named. The government had gone quiet, but in that silence, Every weapon had been loaded, every mine prepared, and every commander reminded of humanity's core belief: never strike first, but when you strike, make it count. The human fleet had found the shadow trail left by the observer drone and followed it to a region of space where even sensors went blind. They used gravitational ripples to track what couldn't be seen. And there, in the middle of nothing, they found it, the hidden path to Vylaris. The enemy had believed their world was untouchable. The Arcari had thought their quantum shadows were enough. But human engineers had cracked the secret, not through force but through patience and pattern. A single jump gate, camouflaged within a hollow asteroid, led to a different reality bubble, a pocket dimension that protected Vylaris like a shell. The Terran fleet didn't hesitate. The first ship through was the Horizon Spear, an experimental battleship with armor forged from collapsed neutron matter. As it emerged from the gate, it detected the defense satellites in orbit, each one armed with weapons meant to disrupt thought and destroy will. But humans were ready. The AI systems on board had already learned how to counter the silence virus by translating its frequencies into meaningless noise. The human mind stayed sharp, unaffected. Within minutes, the Terran fleet broke through the outer defenses like thunder smashing glass. Missiles streaked across the sky. Railguns fired projectiles faster than light. The Valerian towers, once proud and ancient, shattered as if made of paper. Inside their mountain council chamber, the Arcari panicked, not with fear, but with confusion. They had not expected an enemy to come so far, so fast, and with such precision. The skies above Vylaris turned red as fire rained from orbit. For the first time in centuries, the Arcari were truly vulnerable. Their cloaking grids collapsed. Their drone mines were hacked. The humans had brought weapons that used black hole shards, EMP clouds, and plasma drills. But even more terrifying than their weapons was their silence. The human ships did not broadcast threats or demands. They did not ask for surrender. They attacked with a cold, exact purpose to end the threat before it could rise again. Deep inside a surviving bunker, the Mindblade tried to send out a signal to other allies across the galaxy, but the transmission was blocked by a Terran signal jammer that rewrote all outgoing codes into nonsense. He looked at the other council members, once confident, now uncertain, and realized the terrible truth. They had not provoked a species that would negotiate. They had awakened a race that remembered pain, carried the memory of extinction on their backs, and had built their future on the edge of fire. Outside, massive drop pods slammed into the ground, cracking the surface like eggshells. Human soldiers in exosuits poured out, scanning, sweeping, securing. They didn't need to speak, their helmets linked their thoughts. They had one mission: eliminate the source of the EO's attack. In one final attempt, Seer Kral activated the Vault of Ancients, a weapon of last resort buried under the city. It had not been used for thousands of years, a temporal distortion field meant to freeze time for enemy fleets. As it powered up, the air cracked with energy. But just before activation, a strike team of Terran saboteurs breached the vault. Moving like shadows, they bypassed the alien defense systems using adaptive mimicry technology reverse-engineered from an Arcari spy drone. They planted a single device, a localized gravity bomb. It collapsed the core of the weapon in an instant, creating a mini-singularity that swallowed the vault whole. The explosion didn't destroy the city, it erased it from existence. When the smoke cleared, half the council chamber was gone, and with it, the arrogance that had nearly doomed them. The remaining Arcari finally realized that humanity had not come to prove a point, they had come to deliver a message, written not in words, but in action. Across the galaxy, sensors and other empires picked up the battle, the destruction, and the sudden total silence from Vylaris. They saw how quickly the Terrans had found and attacked the hidden world. They saw what had happened to a race that laughed at Earth's warning. And in that moment, a ripple of fear spread across systems. No one dared to speak against the humans. No one called them savages now. They were no longer the strange newcomers, they were a force of reckoning. The warships didn't stay. After securing the area and collecting data, they vanished back through the same secret gate, leaving behind only wreckage and ruins. They took nothing. They claimed no territory. They simply left a scar, one that would never heal. The wrath of humanity had been unleashed, and now the galaxy understood. This species would not beg, would not break, and would never forget. If pushed, they would rise, not with noise, but with silence. The ruins of Vilaris still burned in the silent night of space, floating like broken bones beneath the stars. But what followed after the destruction was not peace. It was the beginning of something much larger. Across the galaxy, hundreds of species gathered behind locked doors and private signals, whispering about Earth, no longer mocking its name. The image of the Terran fleet cutting through Vilaris's ancient defenses had spread like wildfire, and even though no human claimed responsibility, no one doubted who was behind the attack. Some races began to erase records of past insults. Others recalled their ambassadors and sent quiet messages of apology, but the damage had already been done. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by a quiet arrogance, where old empires believed they could manipulate, spy on, or exploit younger races, and humanity had shattered that belief with one focused act of wrath. Now, the balance of power had shifted. Inside the remains of the Arcari Council chamber, one last surviving Mindseer, wounded and broken, sent out a message not of hatred, but of warning to all allied systems. Earth is not what we thought. They are not wild or unstable. They are precise, patient, and far more dangerous than we ever imagined. But even as fear grew in the hearts of many, something unexpected began to happen on Earth. Back on the homeworld, humanity was not celebrating. There were no grand parades or speeches. The faces of those who had fought remained grim. They had done what was needed, not what was wanted. People lit candles for the fallen of Eo's outpost, and every home remembered the silence that had come before the storm. Inside the Terran Assembly, leaders discussed the future, realizing that they had now stepped into a position they had never asked for, one where others looked to them, not just with curiosity, but with fear and caution. The Terrans had shown their strength, but now they needed to prove their wisdom. And so, instead of expanding territory or demanding tribute, Earth sent out messages to every corner of the galaxy. We do not seek war, but we will not be hunted. They opened peaceful channels to those who had once ignored them. They offered technology in exchange for peace. They sent aid to neutral planets that had suffered under older empires. And slowly, the message began to spread not through weapons, but through actions that humans were not here to conquer but to survive with strength and honor. It was this moment, this quiet shift, that became the true turning point. For the first time in galactic history, smaller civilizations reached out to Earth for protection, not out of fear, but out of respect. Stations that had once denied human ships now opened their docks. Scientists who had laughed at Terran designs now studied them with interest. Human language began to be taught in alien schools, not because it was forced, but because it was useful. One by one, the old barriers fell, not because humans pushed them down, but because the galaxy now understood the cost of ignorance. And yet, in the shadows, not all were ready to accept this new order. The Silent Coalition, a hidden network of powerful empires, saw Earth's rise as a threat to the ancient balance. They began to plan, not for peace, but for a second strike, one that would be more careful, more secret, more deadly. But this time, they underestimated something even more powerful than human weapons, human allies. A young ambassador from the Alari, a race once oppressed by the Arcari, warned Earth about the new plot. She came not for reward, but because she believed what she had seen with her own eyes. Humanity had the heart to protect, not just destroy. That warning saved lives. Earth immediately tightened its defense networks, sharing their systems with new allies. Together, they built the Watchline, a series of orbital sentinels that could detect even the smallest enemy movement. Humanity no longer stood alone. And as this unity grew, something else began to change. Even among the enemies of Earth, voices of doubt rose. Whispers inside the coalition questioned if another attack would lead only to more ruin. Some began to ask, what if humanity could be trusted? What if the war they feared could become the peace they needed? And it was at that moment when allies were forged, enemies hesitated, and Earth stood not above others, but beside them, that the galaxy truly shifted. The attack on Eos had once looked like the start of a galactic war. But now, after the wrath and the silence, after the broken ruins of Valeris, and after the rise of unity and truth, it was something else entirely. It was the turning point, the moment when the galaxy stopped laughing at Earth and started listening. A new chapter. Long after the flames of war had faded, long after the skies above fallen worlds turned quiet again, the story of humanity continued to echo across the stars like an ancient warning wrapped in fire and steel. Planets that had once charted human ships, only as weak, forgotten dots on the map now taught their children to never take Earth lightly, not because of fear, but because of what followed after the fire. In dark halls of forgotten empires, the name human still sparked quiet tension, a sharp pause in conversations, as leaders recalled the day Valeris fell without mercy, as a response to the cruelty shown at Eos Outpost. But it was not just the destruction that carved their name into history, it was what they did after. They could have crushed more systems, demanded obedience from the weak, or silenced those who laughed, but instead, they built alliances, helped rebuild shattered colonies, and shared medicine, food, and technology even with those who once mocked them. That confused many, frightened others, and earned the respect of those who truly understood strength. The galaxy remembered not only their fury, but also their restraint. Across hundreds of species, humans were no longer seen as primitive survivors. They were now recognized as powerful builders, protectors of their own, and defenders of balance, if pushed. Stories spread like wildfire of how a single Terran warship stood against the blockade of 10, how a human diplomat risked her life to save an alien child from a burning city during the riots on Drax 7, how Terran engineers helped restart the dying sun of the Orvan system without asking for payment. These tales were whispered in markets, coded into databanks, carved onto temple walls in alien scripts because something about humans was impossible to forget. They didn't follow the patterns the galaxy expected. They weren't the most advanced, nor the oldest, but they were something far more unpredictable. In times of peace, they were kind and curious, always asking, always learning. But when their people were harmed, when their trust was broken, they became something else. The galaxy remembered that too. On the moons of Trask, a statue was built not of a king or emperor, but of a nameless Terran soldier who held the line so that the wounded could escape. On the floating cities of Vekari, a song was written in 12 languages, retelling the story of the day Earth replied to a silent massacre with a fire so bright that the stars themselves seemed to watch. Even the council that laughed, now fractured and scattered, found their memory marked by shame and caution. They had laughed once. Now they taught silence, teaching their youth to never assume the size of the fight by the silence of the opponent. And Earth? Earth did not forget either. Deep within its archives of memory, the story of Eos and Valeris was preserved, not for vengeance, but as a lesson. Children were raised knowing what their ancestors had faced, and how they had responded with power, yes, but also with honor. New generations grew, carrying the same fire in their hearts, not burning with hatred, but with the will to never be cornered again. They expanded with care, not conquest, and wherever they settled, they brought stability. Planets that were once lawless now had peace under Terran influence. Species who had lost hope found it again through Terran medicine, education, and fair trade. Even those who once plotted against humanity found it harder to justify their hatred, for humans were changing the galaxy not with weapons alone, but with how they used them, and when they chose to keep them silent. Their presence was no longer just tolerated, it was sought after. Councils invited them, alliances required their approval, and once isolated races opened borders just to trade with the Terrans. Their way of surviving had become a way of leading. But in the dark, far from peace and unity, there still remained fragments of the old powers, those who believed that humanity must one day fall, that they were a mistake in the long chain of galactic order. They trained in secret, built weapons hidden behind collapsing stars, plotted in old ruins where dust still smelled of war. Yet even they, in their anger, respected what humans had become. Because deep in every strategy, every whisper of a new attack, was one truth that no one could erase. If you strike a Terran once, they will not just strike back, they will make sure you remember why it should never happen again. And that memory, that promise of unstoppable wrath combined with unshakable unity, kept many swords sheathed. It wasn't fear alone that kept the peace, it was respect carved through sacrifice, pain, and choices made in fire. The galaxy had seen many warriors, many rulers, many revolutions, but none had left a mark like humanity. Because humanity didn't just fight to win, they fought to survive with meaning, to protect,